In any case, what I hope to talk about was actually not so much the kind of the population genetics or epidemiology of ideas that are certainly one component of transmission of religious belief, but the content of religious belief, and in particular, I wanted to expand on the key idea in Richard's first presentation, which is that religious belief is not likely to be a biological adaptation itself, but rather a byproduct of cognitive faculties that evolved for other purposes. Religion is a complex set of behaviors and beliefs, and any theory trying to explain it in psychological terms will also be complex, precisely because it is not one thing. It's very unlikely that we have a God module in the brain, but rather there are a number of different ways of thinking and feeling that are brought together in somewhat different combinations in different cultures to comprise what we think of as religion. In my commentary on Wednesday, I made mention of one key component of religious belief that recurs in many cultures, and that is the belief in disembodied spirits, souls, ghosts, gods, saints, and so on, which, following a number of cognitive psychologists, I suggest is made possible by a fundamental human cognitive ability, one that psychologists call theory of mind or intuitive psychology. Dan Dennett called it the intentional stance. That is the ability to impute invisible minds to other people as a way of explaining their behavior, from which it's a short step to conceptualize minds that are detached from their bodies, namely souls and spirits. This is part of a more general phenomenon in religious belief that Pascal Boyer and Scott Atran call attention to, that most religious concepts consist of mundane concepts, ones that we traffic in everyday thought and discourse, but with one emendation, one property struck out, but the rest of the concept being inherited intact. In the case of a soul, it is our intuitive psychology that is engaged. We think of souls without being taught as human agents who can be bribed or persuaded, who need evidence to gain knowledge. The one thing that's crossed out is that ordinarily minds are attached to bodies. You just cross that bit out and you get souls, gods, and spirits. But all the rest of our intuitive psychology comes along for the ride. You don't have to tell people that a saint, for example, will be pleased if you give it something that it wants. That's something that people supply for free. And indeed, even if religious dogma does not explicitly mention a typical trait of a human mind, experiments have shown that the followers will fill it in themselves. An amulet, an idol, an object with supernatural powers will obey our intuitive physics, but with one quality crossed out and replaced by another, namely that it can cure a disease or can listen to one's speech. Now, people who believe in these special objects don't consider them to be part of their mundane experience. It's not as if people holding religious beliefs are literally deluded and think that the laws of the universe really are abrogated routinely, which is why there is always a sense of specialness and mystery and awe and wonder surrounding religious concepts. According to Scott Atran, whose book, In Gods We Trust, is a very interesting psychological analysis of religion, an ability to entertain counterintuitive beliefs is only one of four recurring components of religious belief and practice. Another one is that once one is told of these special, awe-inspiring entities, one tends to link them to existential problems that all human minds can face, such as the certainty that we're going to die, the high probability that various tragedies will befall us, such as illness, defeat, betrayal, and that it's a natural connection for people with very strong desires to have some control over these existential issues in their life to appeal to this mysterious world of wonders, the disembodied souls, objects with magical powers. A third component is that because these counterintuitive concepts with the promise of solving or addressing existential dilemmas can't be falsified or verified, the only way to reinforce a belief in them is by a shared avowal in ceremonial circumstances of those beliefs. You can't do an experiment, but you can get together with other people and affirm one's faith in it simultaneously. And this third component of religion is ceremony, ways in which a group of people share a common belief and also reinforce their solidarity as a group through a number of psychological techniques. Now, Richard alluded to explanations of religion in terms of group selection, namely that groups with particular beliefs might be more formidable in battle than those without such beliefs, and therefore like-minded groups will proliferate at the expense of ones without religious belief. Richard was skeptical of that kind of explanation, as am I, as is Atran, who points out that group solidarity in fact benefits individuals to the extent that defectors, cheaters, can be controlled, that a group of people acting together, and this for reasons explained very lucidly in Richard's book, The Selfish Gene, can enjoy a number of benefits of cooperation, but are always vulnerable to those who would seek to enjoy the advantages of group membership without contributing to the common welfare. And policing possible cheaters and defectors is the fundamental problem in group living among non-relatives. So religious systems often exploit our emotional and cognitive faculties in order to weed out defectors, to make sure that people who are enjoying the group benefits pay their cost. And one of them is public costly commitment. That is, to become a respected member of the group, you have to prove that you're willing to contribute to the to the commonweal by publicly making some sacrifice that is genuinely costly and genuinely hard to fake. Sacrificing your best animals, your best crops, as in the story of the binding of Isaac, your son. In real Jewish tradition, you hand over your newborn son and say, go ahead, cut off a piece of his genitals. Only people who are pretty serious about being a member of the group will be willing to make such a sacrifice. And those kinds of blood sacrifices are a ubiquitous element of a religion as a commitment device. Finally, the ceremonial aspect uses a number of perceptual and cognitive quirks of humans in order to help submerge the interests of the individual to the group. And indeed, the use of these various tricks, again reinforcing one of Richard's arguments, is not evidence that humans naturally submerge themselves to the group for the benefit of the group, but on the contrary, the fact that so many different tricks and techniques must be used to get people to commit to the group suggests that it actually runs against our psychology, and which is why all of these methods of subterfuge must be called in. A number of them actually were summarized by an anthropologist named Alan Fisk, who points out that the kind of solidarity that is felt within a family, for reasons that Richard explained in The Selfish Gene, basically that family members share genes, so genes that foster kin solidarity will be helping copies of themselves when they cause a person to aid a blood relative. That non-relatives aspire to this degree of solidarity. It does not, in fact, come naturally to non-relatives, but they have to be manipulated into treating other members of the sect or clan or tribe as if they were members of the family. And one of the techniques is to appeal to people's kinship psychology by likening the group to a kind of family. And indeed, terms like brethren, brotherhood, our father are common in religious entreaties. And the idea is to create the illusion that a group of people who are not, in fact, related by descent, are fictive kin, is what the term that anthropologists often use. Another technique is commensal celebrations, sacramental meals, as a way of fostering an illusion that people are, as we say, one flesh. There is a widespread conceptual quirk of humans, that's sometimes called psychological essentialism, that we feel that living things gain their powers by being made out of some kind of stuff or essence, some material that makes up their constitution and gives them their powers. And this can be seen in very young children. It can also be seen in educated adults who really do believe in the old adage, you are what you eat. One of my favorite experiments was from the psychologist Paul Rosen, who described a number of fictitious tribes to University of Pennsylvania undergraduates. And each one of these tribes hunted both turtles and wild boar. But what he manipulated is in the experiment is that some of the subjects were told that this hypothetical tribe hunts turtles for their shells and hunts boar for their meat. The other was given the opposite description, that the tribe hunted boar for their tusks and turtles for their meat. Then he asked them, after the story in which these little cues were embedded, to characterize the members of this tribe along a number of personality traits. And he found that those to whom the tribe was described as hunting boar for their meat, described the tribe as fierce and tough and bellicose. And those who were given a description of the tribe that hunted turtles for their meat described them as good swimmers, at home in the water, and so on. Ivy League students. I don't know if it's been replicated at Harvard, but I have no doubt that it would work. The punchline is that the widespread practice of cementing solidarity in belief and in other human commitments is very often accompanied by sacramental meals. The idea being we all eat the same stuff, we're all made of the same stuff. And yet a third technique is ritualistic repetitive motions, bowing simultaneously towards Mecca, standing up and sitting down at the same time, engaging in simultaneous coordinated postures. And this, I suspect, exploits a property of human perception, which psychologists call the Gestalt law of common fate, namely when objects move in a parallel trajectory, they are seen as being grouped into a larger object. An example being when you see a flock of geese flying south in a V formation, one can see it either as individual birds, or it sometimes really looks like a flying V, as if the tightly coordinated motion gives the illusion of it being one large object instead of a collection of small ones. Now, that's not why the geese do it, but it might be why the congregation does it. That if one sees several hundred bodies moving together, one feels as if one is part of a larger superorganism, which is that much more formidable and impressive. This brings me to a final point. Again, the fact that these tricks have to be used, I have to emphasize, because I think it's easy to confuse two positions. One is that people are, by engaging in these rituals, are naturally susceptible to a group psychology, and therefore the behavior is evidence that people naturally submerge their interest to those of the group, with an idea that the opposite idea, which I think is a better fit to the phenomena, namely that people don't naturally submerge their interest to the group, and which is exactly why these ceremonies and rituals and simultaneous public avowals and costly sacrifices are necessary. We don't need complicated rituals or costly sacrifices to induce us to breathe or to eat or to have sex. People don't need much inducement to do those, but they do need an inducement to avow these counterintuitive beliefs and to meld their minds with those of the rest of the community. The final point is that, again, returning to one of the major themes of Richard's earlier writings, that in technical evolutionary biology, human religion is not the only example of animals making a paradoxically self-sacrificing kinds of behavior that biologists often will see in snails, in birds, and in all kinds of creatures, behavior that would seem to go against the fitness of the individual. And I think one of Richard's most interesting contributions to technical evolutionary biology is that this paradox can often be resolved not by asking what good is it for the snail to sacrifice itself to the birds, but rather could the snail be being manipulated by some other organism, and so the snail's self-sacrificial behavior may not be to the benefit of the snail, but to the benefit of, say, the parasite inside the snail that is pulling the strings and pushing the buttons of the snail's nervous system to get the snail to do something that, in fact, runs against the snail's interests, but that is compatible with the parasite's interests. And in solving the puzzle of self-sacrificing behavior in the context of religion, the right way of framing the question, in the spirit of Richard's theory of manipulation, is not what good does it do the individual who's prostrating himself in front of the gods, but what good does it do the religious leader to be able to manipulate the flock to sacrifice themselves for the benefit of the group and indirectly for the benefit of the leader of the group. And another widespread constituent of religious practice is, first of all, the fact that there are religious leaders, shamans and priests and so on, but that they also cleverly abase themselves in front of an even higher power, this hypothetical disembodied spirit, this world of wonders to which they have privileged access. And in fact, sometimes it's rather convenient to invoke an invisible higher authority in order to get what you want in situations of conflicting interests, such as bargaining and threats. So, just to take an analogy, you go into a car dealer, you want to negotiate the best price for the car, and you say, can you sell me this car for $20,000? And the car salesman says, I would love to do that, but it's really not in my power. Let me go check with my boss and see if he'll let me do that. And then they go out, smoke a cigarette, come back and say, well, gee, I would really like to, but my boss says that I can't do it, and I like your face, and you're a worthy customer, but it's just beyond my power. So I can only sell it to you I can't go a penny less than $22,000 as much as I would like to. So that dynamic of sacrificing control in deference to some higher authority, especially one to whom you have exclusive access, is actually a rather clever negotiating technique. And likewise, a leader who says, the guy upstairs won't let me do this, has asked me to pass on this command to all of you, and so on, might be taking advantage of a feature of our psychology in pursuing his own goals, possibly at the expense of the goals of the followers. So I'll end up on that note with a note of how religious leaders can sometimes deliberately abase themselves to a hypothetical higher authority with a joke. and religion, of course, has been a fertile source for jokes and humor. And this one is set in a synagogue on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year, and at the climax of the ceremony, the rabbi and the cantor are standing in front of the opened ark, in front of the Torah. The cantor falls to his knees, looks skyward and says, "Lord, I am nothing." And the rabbi falls to his knees and says, "Lord, I am nothing." The congregation is overcome with emotion. And the janitor at the back of the room falls to his knees and says, "Lord, I am nothing." And the rabbi says to the cantor, "Look who thinks he's nothing."
When, Steve, you say things like the idea of fictive kin or all the other various things you talked about, the idea is to create the illusion, the idea is to manipulate the people, whatever it might be, we could recognize various levels of purposefulness in which that's going on. You seem to be coming down on the side of it being powerful individuals, priests, political leaders, shamans, etc., who manipulate other people by using religion. And that certainly makes a very persuasive case. I could very easily imagine that happening. But it's not the only way in which some sort of purposeful agents could be manipulating us. In the case of the snail, manipulated by its parasite to get eaten by a bird, needless to say, the parasite is not intentionally manipulating the snail. Natural selection has favored those parasite genes, those worm genes, which successfully exert phenotypic effect on snail phenotypes in such a way as to improve the survival of worm genotypes, in just the same way as we normally expect genes manipulate their own phenotypes in order to propagate themselves. So this is a non-conscious, non-intentional, direct product of natural selection of genes. The second kind of pseudo-purposeful entity that could be manipulating us is the parasitic ideas themselves. It may not be a shaman or a priest or a king who is manipulating people by exploiting religion and exploiting people's psychological impulse to religion. It may not be that priests are deliberately emulating the cynical car salesman going to ask his boss whether he can give a good deal. It may be that the ideas themselves are favored in a world of other ideas, in an ecosystem of other ideas, that certain kinds of ideas flourish as replicating entities in their own right, and it only superficially looks as though the manipulation is being deliberately done by the human agents. Or finally, as I say, it is the human agents themselves which are doing the manipulation. And even within that, we might subdivide into those cases where the human agents are sort of doing the manipulation. But on the one hand, they might really, in a fully cynical way, like the car salesman, know exactly what they're doing and probably don't believe in the higher power themselves, but they know that the higher power is very valuable to them politically, and so they're going to pretend to believe in it and they're going to make use of it. That's the cynical end of the continuum. The other end of the continuum, the priests and shamans may sincerely believe in it, and yet still at some level may be exploiting it in ways that they at least half know is to their own self-interest. And I could imagine a continuum between those. So I suppose what I've done is erect a rather complicated set of continua within a continuum where we go from gene selection, meme selection, group selection, if you agree with it, and then we go to human manipulation, which varies within itself from the extremely cynical to the only only slightly cynical. And I would welcome from Steve some further discussion of where he thinks the truth lies along that continuum.
I agree. It's an extremely interesting issue, and one that the empirical anthropologists who study religion ought to put to an empirical test in terms of the degree to which religious leaders worldwide, including in tribal societies, are sincere in their beliefs or are cynical in them. And it may be that there is that they may be sincere at the level of their own intentionality, but cynical at the level of evolutionary intentionality, namely that sincerity can be a very good way to trick people. I think it was Groucho Marx said, the most important trait to get ahead is sincerity. If you can fake that, then you've got it made. And for reasons, actually, again, I'll go back to The Selfish Gene, but in the preface to The Selfish Gene by Robert Trivers, probably one of the most important prefaces in the history of publishing, Bob Trivers outlined in I think 2 sentences, the theory of self-deception, which social psychologists have put to such good use, namely that in a evolutionary arms race in which there is an advantage to deceiving and an advantage to detecting deception, the best deceiver will be the one who, in a sense, believes his own lies, the better not to give away the awful truth through self-contradiction or a nervous tic or sweating and so on. And this is, I think, well known in human negotiation as documented by social psychologists. And it might be a reason that, at least in their own minds, many of the leaders are not, in fact, cynical, but they believe it themselves, and it wouldn't work nearly as well if they were cynical, because that cynicism would itself be detectable. But also, again, I don't mean to suggest these as answers, because they're really more hypotheses that it would be interesting to test. It may even be true that this kind of group-wise self-deception can arise even if there isn't any one leader who benefits. And I think we both agree that the religious situation that we're most familiar with, the Abrahamic religions, with the single all-powerful deity and the political/religious hierarchy, is not universal in religious beliefs. That there are also pantheistic beliefs and cases in which there isn't necessarily a religious authority, some pope or high priest. But there still might be a dynamic in which all the members of the group, it's in the interests of all the members of the group for some belief to be held by all the other members of the group. As in a public goods or prisoner's dilemma situation, everyone can benefit if everyone makes some sacrifice to the group, but many people would lose if some subset of people fail to contribute but got the benefits. I mean, and this is most dramatic in the case of war. If the entire platoon or brigade has solidarity and they all fight together, then they can, in many cases, succeed over an enemy. But each member has to worry that if some of the others start to defect, he would be a sucker for staying in too long, and which is, of course, why defection in a military context is so instantly and severely punished, because the whole coalition can unravel if a few members start to, because then everyone else is a sitting duck or is a sucker for going along. And so in cases where there is an advantage to the individuals of the group acting together, of everyone simultaneously agreeing to sacrifice for the good of the group, which then redounds to the good of the individuals, each person might see it in his interest to have this belief in the formidability and solidarity of the group be avowed by everyone else. And if there is a coordination problem to which religious ceremonies might be a kind of solution, namely to set up the situation in which your brethren, as they say, are unlikely to defect. And as part of the bargain, you allow yourself to be manipulated so that you're not tempted to defect. But as long as in a sense, it's a manipulation of everyone agreeing to manipulate everyone else and themselves simultaneously, can be a way of enjoying the benefits to the individual of group membership and protecting it against the danger of unraveling, even if it isn't one superior authority who, by enforcing these myths and rituals, benefits at the expense of the group members.
I think Axelrod's book, which sort of started out a lot of this thinking, the sort of thing you're talking about, he has a chapter on how to set up societies or set up groups in such a way as to maximize cooperation. And once again, and that's sort of what you're talking about now, you're setting up a military organization in such a way as to maximize, so every individual can maximize their benefit. But organization in such a way as to maximize, so every individual can maximize their benefit. But again, I'm curious to wonder the extent to which, in this case, generals did sit down together and actually say, well, how shall we organize our structure in order to maximize Axelrodian cooperation? Obviously, they never read Axelrod, but I mean, in some sense, does the High Command tailor the institutions in order to achieve the results that you're talking about, or do they, in some sense, emerge by not a simply Darwinian process, but some sort of quasi-Darwinian? And I think we need probably research on that very question. And on the matter of religion, it does seem to me vitally important to know whether religious people are being manipulated by leaders or are being manipulated by means, because that's a first step towards combating the menace which is religion. Turning to Dr. Derose, I'm trying to work out why I found it difficult to follow quite what he was saying. I think it was because at several points, crucially, I could have done with a for example. I mean, we heard that evidentialist views that all beliefs should be based on evidence will lead, ultimately, to what he called an intolerable skepticism. And clearly he didn't have time to spell out the epistemological reasoning, and I'm certainly not asking him to do so. But it would be quite nice to hear an example of what, just one example of what intolerable skepticism might look like. I mean, how would we recognize intolerable skepticism if we saw it? So perhaps in a moment he might respond to that. He then went on to discuss ways in which beliefs might be rationally held in the absence of evidence. And he invoked the idea of parity, which I understood to be something like this, that we accept certain perceptual beliefs as the fundamental evidential data which we just accept, and we can't prove that they're valid if we see something and we just believe it's true. And by analogy with that, it may be that some of the experiences which mystics and other religious people report as, I have experienced God, and this experience is just as real to me as my experience of this microphone or this book. So by an argument of parity, I should accept the experience of God as just as valid as the experience of my own eyes. Dr. Derose himself was not wholly convinced by that, and he went on to talk about the reason why you accept your primary perceptual data is rather more that they all hang together, they make sense in the context of each other, and I could warm to that. That seemed to me to be a rather promising approach. And I suppose if you wanted to apply that in a positive way to religion, you would say that in highly evolved religious systems, the various experiences that people within one religion, within one religious tradition report, hang together in some sort of mutual coherence. But that set me thinking about the reason why scientific beliefs are, I think, so much more persuasive than either religious beliefs or than simple perceptual beliefs. Everybody knows that visual illusions and other sensory illusions are remarkably persuasive. So actually, we don't necessarily trust our sense organs. Our sense organs quite often do mislead us. How do we know they mislead us? Well, we know from, again, hanging together scientific data, which are a whole corpus of experimental data, of theory, of observational data, all of which hang together in the same kind of way as I think he was implying for religions. If we ask how do we know that the continents drift about in plate tectonics, how do we know that DNA is a double helix? Nobody has seen these things. This is not direct perceptual information. What this is evidence put together by the entire international scientific community, where the measurements that are used in substantiation of theories and hypotheses are sense data. You need eyes to read the gauges of your instrument. You need eyes to read the fingerprint patterns of magnetic stripes on the sea floor, which indicate that the sea floor is spreading, or not eyes, but magnetometers, and then eyes read the gauges on the magnetometers. So certainly sense data lie at the bottom of all scientific observation and experiment, but in a very mundane, ordinary sort of way. The important evidence comes not from direct sensory perception, but from hypotheses tested, from measurements exhaustively made, from computations made upon them, from a consensus which emerges from, as I said, the entire scientific community. There are notorious cases where perception, simple perceptual beliefs, to use his phrase, are actually disconcertingly disproved by scientific evidence. I mentioned visual illusions, but the weirdness of quantum mechanics, for example, which is flat contrary to perceptual beliefs and deeply disconcerting to anybody who relies on perceptual beliefs and intuitive beliefs. Nevertheless, the experimental evidence in favor of quantum mechanics is overwhelmingly strong. And perhaps I better hand over to Dr. Derose on that.
Yeah, well, we're not going to be able to settle these, but just to quickly remark, on the intolerable skepticism, skating over some crucial assumptions, but the basic idea is, if your answer, view it this way. You want to know, imagine yourself faced with a skeptic, and you want to know, you ask the skeptic, what do I need to convince you? And he says, well, for your belief, for this belief, you need to give me evidence for it. And you eventually will want to know, well, which propositions will you accept as evidence without my providing evidence for them? And if he says absolutely none, I want evidence for every single one of them, and also won't allow circular reasoning, it looks like you won't have anything to begin with in your argument table. I mean, the way to put it is, if all our beliefs are treated as guilty until proven innocent, you won't be able to prove any of them innocent because you have nothing to begin with. Thus, we try to treat at least some of them as innocent until proven guilty. And it looks like the best way to do that is to take certain simple perceptual beliefs as being among those who get that special status. You are absolutely right. Our simple perceptual beliefs go wrong. We find this out, and we correct them. Right? That's because the rationality that's conferred on them in this non-evidential way is defeasible. And what happens is, and this is one of the things science does for us, is tells us when we're going wrong. But see, the difference is, if you treat your beliefs generally as innocent until proven guilty, then there is the possibility of proving some guilty, and we do that. Right? But if you treat them all as guilty until proven innocent, there's no doing anything. That's why this approach to epistemology takes reasoning as giving some initial status to the beliefs we naturally form, and sees reasoning as just trying to adjudicate among them. And that means even if theistic beliefs have this status, right, there's still the possibility that they get proven guilty. And that may happen.
Well, then what is the difference between, why privilege theistic beliefs rather than the literally billions of beliefs which